If you haven't heard of it already, there's a group of software programs called the Adobe Creative Suite. And it's the #1 professional choice of designers worldwide. The Adobe Creative Suite subscription includes access to the following software. The 3 programs we'll be studying in this class will be Adobe Photoshop, Illustrator, and InDesign. You can download and access these programs by signing up for the Adobe Creative Cloud, which gives you access to these programs for a monthly fee. This fee can be heavily discounted if you're a student at a university or a teacher. So make sure to explore your options and see if you qualify for any discounts. Once I have access to these 3 programs, how do I know which one to use? Photoshop is the king of photos, and I use Photoshop whenever I need to do any photo editing, cropping, or retouching work. Photoshop has a wide array of filters for photos and images. I also like to use Photoshop and work with digital images that are sized in pixels, like Facebook ads and social media ads. All 3 Adobe Creative Suite programs use what's called the layering system. You can have hundreds of layers to make up an image. These layers give you minute control over how things are cropped and how images behave. Photoshop is called a raster program. It works with photos by editing them and manipulating the pixels. That means if I open up a small photo in Photoshop and I try to blow up the image to a large size, you tend to see it get blurry. That's because it stretches those little pixels larger, so the resolution deteriorates as it gets bigger. That's why Photoshop is great for working with photos and raster images. But when you're wanting to develop logos or things that need to remain in vector, I like to switch over to Adobe Illustrator. That's because it's a vector program. That program draws lines and circles and shapes using equations. So that means if I make this circle really large for a very large banner or poster size, it doesn't lose any of the quality or its resolution. I love Illustrator. Between the 3 main design programs I use, I spend the majority of my design time using Adobe Illustrator, and that's because of its vector environment. I do all of my logo design work in Illustrator as well. I could take my logo and make it large or small without any resolution issues. Also, the powerful pen tool in Illustrator. I'm able to create custom intricate shapes that are essential for logo design and any other symbol or icon design. I also do a lot of my print pieces in Illustrator as well, as it's easy to export with bleed and all the extra things that printers like to see in large format printing, like banners, flyers, posters, and more. Really, the only limitation of Adobe Illustrator is its lack of photo editing support, but that's why we have our trusty Photoshop, which I can use to edit photos in Photoshop and simply import them to Illustrator when I'm ready to use them. So what about Adobe InDesign? Whenever you have multiple page documents, maybe 4 pages or more, I suggest creating a document in InDesign. InDesign is used mostly to build publications like flipbooks, magazines, digital PDF documents, and more. And it gives you more control over paragraphs and larger blocks of copy. It also has something called master pages, which can help you apply the same basic design to all pages, even hundreds of pages at a time, so it could be a huge time saver for a designer. There are projects where I use all 3 programs. For example, I may need to edit a magazine cover in Photoshop. Then I import that magazine cover into InDesign and build out the layout. I could even bring in a vector illustration I do in Illustrator into InDesign to bring it all together. It takes a little bit of time to master all 3 programs, but once you do, there's not one single graphic design job you cannot get done. Welcome to Adobe Photoshop. As you can see, this is the latest version available on the Adobe Creative Cloud. Updates to the software are free each year for those who have a subscription to the Adobe Creative Cloud. For those students who do not have an Adobe subscription, I get asked this question a lot. Can I use older versions of the software for this class? And my short answer is absolutely. There is no reason that having software that's a little older should stop you from creating wonderful design work and projects. The next few lessons of this course are for those who are brand new to Photoshop, or maybe you've only opened it a few times and played around with it, or those who want to start at the very basic level. For those already a little comfortable with the basic interface and tools of Photoshop, feel free to move through these lessons quickly or skip them. There are going to be some really awesome up-to-date tools that may not be available to you if you have older versions, and I'll try to mention those throughout this course, what those tools might be. All versions of Photoshop have the same basic elements, so let's go ahead and get started by opening up a new document and learning those basic tools. We are in Adobe Photoshop. And I had some lessons here last year, and I wanted to take a moment to take some student feedback and rework the whole first hour of the Photoshop section, because I wanted to make sure I went slow enough for those who have never been in Adobe Photoshop before. So we're going to spend a few extra lessons, a few extra minutes, talking about some very vital tools like how layers work, how the type tool works, and just getting more familiar with the overall workspace. If you're brand new to Adobe Photoshop, I highly encourage you to watch the next couple lessons as we set up our workspace. So here we are at the very beginning home screen. We're going to go ahead and open up a basic document and get started getting to know some of the tools. So I'm going to go down to Create New. Just going to click on Create New Document, and you're going to always have this New Document box pop up, and it's going to be able to give you a chance to input the sizes. You can do inches, pixels, centimeters, millimeters. There's a lot of different measurements you can use depending on where you are in the world. I'm in the United States. I use inches a lot for printed documents, and I use pixels for digital documents. So let's just say, for example, I'm just going to do a little social media post. That's a digital graphic. I want to do that in pixels, and I want to do 1080 in width and 1080 in height. So just putting in my basic dimensions. You can change your orientation to landscape or portrait size, but in this case it's the same size, so it's just going to be a square format. And you can input your resolution, which really matters a lot more when you do printed documents. You want to always kind of have a nice 300 resolution for anything that's going to end up being printed. Since this is a digital document, what matters the most is the pixel sizes and making sure they're the appropriate sizes depending on where you're going to post it. And everywhere you post, there's going to be different pixel requirements. There's also color mode, and we're going to stick with RGB, which is going to be great for digital, as we learned in the design theory lessons, and CMYK is great for print. So we're not going to really worry about bitmap or grayscale right now. We're just going to do RGB color. You can start off with a transparent background, so nothing on your canvas at all. I like to start off with a white background because sometimes I like to just go ahead and have a background set. It's really up to you. Default is white, so we're just going to keep it on white. Okay, we're not going to worry about any of the advanced options, so we're just going to go ahead and click Create. So now we have a document that is 1080 by 1080 pixels in size, so perfect for a quick little Instagram post. So the focus of this course is graphic design projects, and so when I'm teaching Photoshop, it's going to be a little bit different if you're going to take a tutorial learning Photoshop for photographers or learning Photoshop for web designers. This is going to have a heavy focus on graphic design tools and the type of work that you're going to do as a graphic designer. So there's so many tools to Adobe Photoshop, you're not going to be able to learn all of them in a month or all of them sometimes even a year. I'm still learning new tools, and I've been in Photoshop for over 20 years. They're constantly coming out with new updates. What we're going to focus on in this course is specifically graphic design tools and things I use very often in graphic design projects. There's been a lot of things that have changed over the last couple years, but Photoshop has really stayed, all the basics have really stayed the same. So as you're working through this, you may have some different options, or maybe it's configured a little bit differently, but overall the basic stuff, tools, and windows are in the same place. So what we're going to do is kind of get used to the overall format of Adobe Photoshop. On the left, you have your toolbar right down the side, just kind of your basic tools. There's the brush tools. This is how you get your type tool. You have your shape tools where you can build shapes. This is your basic building block tools to create things on your canvas. And up at the top, you'll notice even more options. And we're going to go over this, especially when we do photo editing. You're going to have a lot of your adjustments, changing the brightness, the saturation, the exposure, the vibrance of a photo will be done in some of these top options. There's also select options. There's filters that you can apply. A lot of the filters that you see in Photoshop is accessed in this top menu system. There's all sorts of other extra stuff as well, like 3D and plugins. And then over to the right, you have your panel system. This is where you're going to be able to kind of change a lot of the settings on the tools, change the color of a lot of objects. This is by default. This is a default workspace, and I'll show you kind of how to get yours to match mine, although you don't have to match mine completely. Once you get comfortable with customizing your right panels, you'll be able to get what you like to have out there, and you don't have to match my settings. So these are little panels that can be dragged out, and you can put these close to your document so you can be very close to certain options and settings with your panels. And these can drag right back and click right into here, and you can customize this any way you want. You can even create a new window. Let's say you want to have all your color options in one, which is by default. I have my swatches, gradients, and color all in one nice handy panel. Let's say I want to take patterns and I want to drag patterns down to here. You just kind of drag and click, and you'll be able to pop it right in there. And if you want to take it out, you just drag it out and press the X if you don't want that panel open anymore. So let's say I have color. This is a very important panel to have. Let's say I accidentally, when I'm customizing it, I click off and I go, oh no, I lost color. Where's my color? It's gone. I press the X close key and I can't open it again. What you could do is you can go up to Window at the very top. You'll be able to load all the panel options here. So let's go down to Color, click on Color, and there it is. It's back again. I can drag it back in place. If I ever open a panel that you don't see on the right side, simply go to Window and you'll be able to adjust and add any of the windows or panels that I'm talking about. So let's say I'm talking about brushes and for some reason it's not open. Just click on brushes and then you can have all these brush options that can be added. There's also this extra overflow extendable little toolbar here that you can expand. You can click on these little double arrows. It's kind of an extra toolbar. So let's say I want to have something that's really important. You could just drag color in here and you can access color here and it can fly out of that panel. So it's kind of an overflow. If you run out of room over here on the main panels, you can have kind of this overflow option and you can just drag it right back. It's fully customizable. So let's talk about getting a default workspace. Some of you guys might have been playing around in Photoshop. You rearranged windows. You're kind of like, what's kind of a good basic default setting for me to get back to normal? And there's something called workspaces that you can load, which will load different kinds of panels according to what you're doing. If you go up to Window and you go down to Workspace, you'll see several different workspaces loaded. So if you're doing a 3D workspace, load that. If you're doing painting, digital painting, or if you're doing photo editing, and then graphic and web. I kind of like to stick to the default and customize it. So that's what we're going to do, is we're going to just make sure it's set on Essentials. And if it's already on Essentials, you can go all the way down here to Reset Essentials. It'll bring it back to the default space. So let me just click on Reset Essentials. It's going to bring all my panels back to the default Essentials workspace. And you can change that workspace at any time. You can even save your workspace. So I can go to Workspace down here and let's say I have it perfect. I've spent 30 minutes customizing it and adding the panels that I like. I can always save it by going to New Workspace and doing My Workspace. And you can even save toolbar settings, and we'll get to that a little bit later. So now I can go up and load my workspace. But I'm going to go to back to Essentials just so we kind of have similar looking screens. Doesn't have to match exactly. So I'm just going to reset Essentials. So there's some really important stuff. We'll go over this one panel at a time. There's layers. Layers are going to be a big deal in Adobe Photoshop. It's what makes Photoshop Photoshop, is being able to arrange different layers so certain items are on top of others. If you ever need to change any preferences, you can go up to Photoshop up here at the top, go to Preferences, click on General, and it's going to load a lot of different default options. And I just want to take just a minute or two to show you what I have. You don't have to match mine. You're going to develop your own preferences for things as you get comfortable with the software. So you can change the color of the interface. You can make it white if that appeals a little bit more to you, or you can make it black, which can show up really good if you're working on really light documents. And then if you're working on really dark documents, sometimes having a white workspace works really well. I kind of like the in-between darker gray. That's the default, and I just feel comfortable with that. But whatever you would like, this is where you would kind of change those settings. Everything else I'm leaving as default, however I opened it up. Hopefully you're not overwhelmed. We're going to be going over all these tools and panels over and over and over again as we work on projects throughout the course. You're going to, don't feel like you have to master each thing I go over here in a minute. Just take your time and we're going to go over it. I'm going to repeat a lot of things just to kind of be able to help you slowly move through everything and learn it. So what I've done is I've developed something a little bit new to teach Photoshop. I have not taught Photoshop this way before, but I do teach Adobe Illustrator, which is the next software we're going to learn, using a worksheet where we're going to have certain shapes we're going to recreate. We're going to recreate lots of different things using this worksheet. It's a great practice test run so that you can do everything along with me and you can feel like you can do it step by step. So I developed this Photoshop document. You can download it right here in the Photoshop section or the Photoshop folder of the downloadable resources, and you'll be able to open it up and see what you're seeing right now. I've opened up the Photoshop Student Worksheet.psd. And PSD is the file name that is used for any Photoshop file. So go ahead and double click that, open it up. We're going to start in the upper left hand corner and slowly work our way through the document. So I want to zoom in. There's no way I can read some of this text. I really want to zoom in. I have a laptop that has a trackpad that I can take my two fingers and easily zoom in and out. But some of you guys don't have trackpads. But if you do have a trackpad, you can zoom in and out by pinching your two fingers in and out. It's very helpful. But if you just have a mouse and keyboard, you can always go right down here to this section where you can manually type in and zoom in. So right now it's at 54% view. If I were to type in 100%, this would show 100% view of the document. This is just like Microsoft Word and other programs. I think 100% works really well. What's great about this bottom area is you can see the document size as well. If you look down here, it's a 4,000 pixels by 5,000 pixels document at a 300 resolution. So it's kind of nice to be able to glance and see how big a photo is when you open it, when you look down in this area. So now that I have it typed in, just typed in 100 and press enter, I was able to zoom in. So let's go ahead and start. I'm just going to go all the way up to the top. You can either, I'm using my trackpad to kind of move around. But if you just had a mouse and a keyboard, you can just slide this up and down or slide this across to be able to kind of find and orient your position in the document. So using basic shape tools. So I'm going to go to our toolbar for this. We're going to go all the way down here. You see a little kind of a square. You're going to go ahead and click anything that has this little triangle at the bottom right. You're going to go ahead and click and hold, and you're going to get a drop-down menu. You're going to get more menu options. And we're going to go all the way down to the ellipse tool, and this is how you're going to be able to create circles. So I have the ellipse tool circled, and some students I've noticed have problems with certain tools not showing up on their toolbar. If you ever have this issue, go down to these three little dots right down here at the bottom. It says Edit Toolbar, and hold and just do Edit Toolbar. It's going to have this extra drop-down menu. And you can restore defaults if you want to restore to the default. Somehow you accidentally moved a tool or a tool got off the toolbar and got deleted. You can just restore your defaults. So with our circle tool selected, I want to make an imperfect oval. So that's going to be easy. I'm just going to click and drag and try to match this shape. So I'm going to click somewhere up here, click and drag, and I'm going to be able to make an imperfect oval. And I could take these transform controls and bring it down if I want to make it match that gray area perfectly. So let's kind of make it match. Kind of make sure everything is over that gray area. So we were able to recreate that simple oval. So let's say I want to move this object around. So we're going to get what's called the Move tool, which is right up here, and there is a keyboard shortcut for this, which is V that you can press. But I like to kind of go up here when I'm first learning and click on the tool manually. So I clicked on the Move tool, and now I can click on my object and I can move it around anywhere I want, just clicking on the Move tool. And what I want to do is I want to be able to transform this oval. Maybe I want to make it a little bit longer. I just want to change the shape. How do I do that? I'm not seeing any kind of transform controls. So by default, Photoshop usually has this unchecked, but I love to be able to check it because it helps me out so much to be able to transform my shapes. So go up to the top and click on Show Transform Controls. Now all of a sudden you'll have this box with these little anchor points on it. And it's going to give us a chance to be able to change and scale our object easier. It's also, if I go to the corners, I can also rotate it as well. So this, make sure when you have the Move tool selected that you have Show Transform Controls checked. This is going to help us when we want to make objects bigger to match the gray areas. So we have a layer here. If you go down into our layer system, I'm going to go ahead and bring this out. This is what we have here. If you ever want to know what is on your layer, I like to toggle visibility on and off. See this little eyeball icon? If you click it on and off, you'll be able to kind of see what's on your layer. So I'm going to have that toggled back on, and I'm going to call this oval. It's really nice to be able to name your layer so you don't get lost. So that is my oval layer. So what I want to do, if I want to create the next shape, I want to be able to create a new layer so that I can move these independently. If I didn't, let's say I went ahead and I wanted to create this next circle and I create it, they're on the same layer now. So now if I take the Move tool, they're like connected and I can't really move them independently, and I want to be able to do that. So let's create a fresh new layer. So I'm going to go down here to create a new layer. It's going to be a little addition sign. So create a new layer, and we're going to call this circle. And now we can get our ellipse tool and be able to create a simple circle. But I want the circle to be perfect, not imperfect. So there's a little trick. So let's say I don't do the trick and I just try to match this circle. Well, I can get kind of close, but it's not perfect. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold down the Shift key, click and drag, and when I hold down Shift and drag, it's going to be able to scale it dimensionally. And we'll do this a lot in Adobe Illustrator as well. But we're going to be able to scale this dimensionally and click on it. So let's say I want to be able to match it perfectly. What I can do is I can make this a little bit opaque or transparent so I can see what's going on behind the shape. I'm going to go down, I'm still in my layers panel, I'm going to go to opacity, and I'm just going to reduce this a little bit so I can kind of see what's underneath. It's going to let everything underneath through because this is now transparent. So I'm going to take my Move tool, or I can press V on my keyboard, and I can move and match it. And if I need to scale it, I can use my transform controls right here and be able to match it perfectly. Now I can go back and I can increase my opacity to full black. So we have two independent layers. We have a circle layer, we have an oval layer. So I want to move my oval, I will highlight my oval, get my Move tool, I can move him independently. I can select my circle, I can move him independently. And this is how layers work. And getting really comfortable with layers is something we're going to do. We're going to be creating projects that have 20 or more layers. So we're really going to get to practice layers a lot. But I find that having as many different layers helps with the flexibility. If I had these two connected, and let's say I just had these two layers connected, I wouldn't be able to have as much freedom and overlapping and creating designs and creating artwork. So when in doubt, create a new layer. It always helps to have everything on different layers to be able to move things around with more freedom. So let's move on in our document. So now we've created solid shapes. Now we're going to create shapes with just a stroke. So it's clear on the inside and a stroke on the outside. So we're going to just take our ellipse tool, and what we're going to do is we're going to remember to create a new layer, and we're going to type this stroke circle. And we're going to say solid because this is going to be a solid stroke. And I want this to be a perfect circle, so I'm going to hold down the Shift key, click and drag, and I'm going to be able to get a perfectly dimensional circle. I want to reduce the opacity so I can kind of make sure I match this stroke. And I'm going to go ahead and move this. Just get the move tool, move it over. So now what I want to do is I want to be able to make this is a solid fill. I want to turn it into a stroke. And there's something that's really, really important. This is a very important panel. It's called the Properties panel. And this is going to contain so many things that you can change, like fonts, colors of objects, and then you can even do stroke on here too. So this is the Properties panel. I'm going to bring this out so you can take a look at it. This is Properties panel. So with this selected, I have our circle selected. I'm going to go down here to there's a Appearance panel within this Properties panel, and it's going to have a fill, which is going to change the color of our fill, and also a stroke, which is going to add a little bit of a stroke. So let's say I add a blue stroke, and there's a stroke. So let me change the width or thickness of the stroke, just like that. And we'll do this again in Adobe Illustrator and the next software. This is kind of repeatable stuff, so don't feel worried if you're not getting all this. We're going to repeat it over and over and over again. So now let's say, okay, so let me go ahead and make this 100%, just in my layers panel, just making this 100% opacity. So here we are. I want to punch that orange stuff out. I want that to be clear. I just want to see the stroke. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to our fill, which is this orange color or whatever color I want to make it. And I can go up here to null. This is called null or no color. And a little stripe has this little red kind of diagonal line across a white box. We're going to go ahead and click that, and it's going to create, basically make it nothing. So there's no fill. No fill, and then we have a stroke. And we can just change our stroke thickness to make it match a little bit better. And that's how you create a stroke. So I can go ahead and take my transform controls, hold down Shift, and drag. There we go. Just kind of trying to match that as best as I can. I'm going to press Enter, and there we go. We can always get our Move tool, move this independently, and we have our stroke. So now we want to do the same thing, but we want to add these dots instead of a solid line. So what we're going to do, let me go ahead and drag these out here so we can kind of see, have more screen. I'm going to duplicate this, and there's several ways to duplicate a layer. You could do the traditional kind of longer way, and you can right click. This is our layer. You can always toggle visibility to see which one it is. You can right click and duplicate layer, and it'll create a duplicate. Just click on OK, and it created a copy. So now I have two of these floating around, and I can go over here and add the dots. Or there is a couple of shortcuts. You can hold down the Option key or the Alt key if you are in a Windows, and the Option key is if you're in a Mac. And you can hold down that button, then click and drag, and you're able to create a duplicate. So it's just kind of a quicker way to create a duplicate. I do this over and over again in future lessons. You're going to probably get sick of me talking about it, but it's a great extra quick way to duplicate instead of having to right click and duplicate, or do just a copy and paste of the layer. So let's try that again. So I'm going to have this selected, hold down Option key or Alt key if you're on a Windows. I have that selected. I'm going to click and drag and release, and I have a little duplicate here. So now that we have the duplicate, let's go back into our Properties panel, and we're going to pull up Properties panel a lot, so it's nice to keep that handy. And I'm going to go to Stroke, and I'm going to go down to this Extra Options panel, and I'm just going to make it dots instead of a solid stroke. And now I can change the size, and it'll add more dot density around it. That's a pretty close match. You don't have to be perfect with this one. And we can even do our transform controls if we need to kind of move it around a little bit. You press Enter. Let's move on. Let's go down here to the scaling shapes and using rounded corners. So anytime we create a new shape, if we want to be able to move it independently, we need to create a new layer. So I'm going to go down here. I'm going to go ahead and click on New Layer. So I have a new layer. This will be square. So let's go over here to our Shapes tool. We had it on the Ellipse tool. So let's just click, hold, and get a Rectangle tool. And let's change the color here before. So you notice how we changed it in our Properties panel when we selected an object. We can change it up here as well. And either way works. You can change your options here, or you can change it in the Properties panel. when you have an object selected. But we haven't created our object yet. So let's go up on the top and go ahead and set our colors. So let's say I don't want any of these recently used colors. This will load any colors I've used in the last couple of projects. I want to be able to pick on the hue slider, which we covered in the design theory lessons. To be able to load the hue slider, you're going to click right here on color picker, and it's going to load our little hue cube. So you have all of these different colors. Here's your hue and here's your saturation. You know, we covered this a little bit in those lessons. So let's say I want to make it blue. So I'm going to slide my hue slider all the way up to the blue hue. Oh, maybe look a little more blue. Make it nice and highly saturated. And I'm going to click on OK. And it right now has a stroke. I don't want a stroke. I want to turn strokes off. So select stroke and make sure it's on null. So no stroke and a blue fill. Now we'll be able to create our rectangle. So let's go ahead and hold down Shift. And we already created our new layer. If we didn't create a new layer, it would put it on one of these other layers and we won't have them as separate objects. So now I'm on a square layer, click, hold, drag, and I have a square. I'm going to take my move tool and I can click anywhere off. Let's say I want to click on this and I want to click anywhere off to deselect it. Just click anywhere off the artboard or on other objects to kind of deselect it. Let's say I want to click on something and automatically select that object I click on. If you notice that your Photoshop is not doing that, there's an option here called Auto Select. Make sure it's selected. If you unclicked Auto Select and I try to click on any of these layers, it's going to continue to select the layer that's selected. So you have to manually select the layer to move it. I like to be able to have Auto Select on to be able to click and drag and not have to select the layer and drag. But there are instances when you have a lot of things happening on your screen where turning Auto Select is nice because then you can move the shape anywhere you want, no matter where you click, and you don't accidentally click something else. Don't worry, we'll be using that a lot in the future. So I have Auto Select on. So I went ahead and clicked my shape, so now I can move it around. I want to hold down Option and drag to create a copy. And I can scale this. So you see the transformed controls is clicked. So now I have this option to scale it. So what I'm doing is I'm just taking this transform box and moving it bigger and bigger and bigger. And that's it. I can select my move tool. I can deselect. And I can select it again if I want. And I'll hold down Option and drag. Or I can do it the long way. Right click, duplicate layer. When I duplicate layer, I don't have to create a new layer because it just automatically creates the layer. Move it over here. We're just going to slowly scale this bigger and bigger. And then hold down Option and drag again. And so now I want to do rounded corners. So I'm going to make this a little bit opaque, just in my layers. I'm going to go up to the corner and I'm going to be able to click and drag this corner. And it's going to do all of them at the same time. Just keep continuing to drag, drag, drag until it matches it. You can at any time click these and make them bigger. Once again, we'll be going over a lot of these in Adobe Illustrator as well because it's got a very similar function. Okay, so let's say we want to have more dramatic corners. I'm going to go ahead and hold down Option and drag or Alt if you're on a Windows. And let's say I want to match and make this a circle. So let's make this a little transparent so we can see. And we can click and drag. We can even make it such rounded corners that it even turns into a circle. Look at that. I just wanted to kind of show you the option of rounded corners. So we're slowly working our way through this worksheet. We're going to be talking about layers. We've already done a lot of layer work, but this will be a good test for you just to make sure you know how to properly move and drag layers. Let's get our triangle tool. So we go down to our shapes tool. Let's select the triangle tool and let's hold down Shift, click and drag to create a perfectly scaled triangle. Let's get our move tool and move it into place. And I'm going to go use my transform controls to be able to scale it. So I would like to create a duplicate. I'm going to do it the long way this time. I'm going to right click triangle and I'm going to right click and make a duplicate layer. And I created a duplicate layer. I have the move tool selected and I can drag it out. So now what I want to do is I want to be able to rotate this so it's basically flipped around. So I can click on the rotate. It's going to give me a degrees of how many degrees I'm rotating it. So let's say I want to just rotate it right here. And let's say that's not really perfect, is it? I would really love to rotate this perfectly. So let's go back. And I can hold down the Shift key before I click and drag or rotate. And it's going to click in these perfect little even numbers. All the way down here. So let's make these different colors so that we know kind of which one is which. So I'm here in my appearance panel. I have my layer selected. I'm going to double click blue and make it orange. And go ahead and click on my document to unselect. So there we go. We have two different layers. I can click and move these around. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take both of these, and you can also select your layers right here. A trick to select more than one layer is you can click on a layer, hold down the Shift key, and highlight two layers. Or I have this one selected. I can hold down the Shift key, click up here and click, and it'll select more than one. Just kind of a little trick to be able to select more than one layer. So let me select triangle 2. I guess we'll call this blue triangle. And call this red or orange triangle. So I can select one, hold down Shift, select 2. I can duplicate these. So I can right click and duplicate layers. It's kind of the long way to do it. That's okay. It made a copy of both. With the move tool selected and these copies selected, I'm going to drag it down. We're going to change it so it's switched around. So the blue triangle is above the orange triangle. It's on top of the layering system. So right now the orange is on top of the blue. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight my blue triangle layer, and I'm just going to click and drag, and it's going to pop on top. And now it's on the top of the layering system. And we can also drag it back down below. So lots of easy ways to kind of get layers on top of each other. We are back in Adobe Photoshop, and we're going to talk about the text tool. So there's a couple different ways to create text. You can create single line text, like for headlines, or you can create text blocks. We're going to do both of those with this exercise. So let's do the very basics. Let's select our type tool. Right down here, it's going to look like a little T. So we have that selected in our toolbar, and we're just going to click once and go ahead and type in lowercase. So lowercase. And we're going to make it a little bit bigger. We're just taking our transform controls in the corner and just making it a little bit bigger. It looks like I have italics on, so that's no big deal. I can go over here to my properties panel. I'm going to go ahead and drag that out. And I'm using Open Sans, which you can find on Google Fonts. So if you Google Fonts, it'll pull up a website where you can download Open Sans. It's a free font that you can use. Or you can use Helvetica, you can use Arial, all these different typefaces. It doesn't really matter. But that's what I'm using here if you wanted to match it perfectly, but don't feel the pressure if you don't feel like going and finding Open Sans on Google Fonts. But I wanted to use a typeface that anybody could download and use without having to purchase any kind of typeface. But I love Open Sans. It's a nice flexible typeface. So let's go ahead and character panel, we can go ahead and change it. Instead of italic, we can do light. So now it's going to match it a little bit better. You can also manually change the size of the typography here. So if we wanted to make it bigger, we can type in 30. This is going to be points, the point system. And we can drag it to make it match. So it looks like it's 30 points in size. So pretty simple enough, just in the character panel, just changing some basic characteristics, just like you would in a Word program as well. So now I'm going to make a copy. At this time I'm going to use my little shortcut, and I'm going to hold down Option or Alt and click and drag. So now I can sit here, and if I want to do all caps, I can hold down the Shift key as I type and create all caps. But that's kind of cumbersome. I want to be able to change it to all caps without having to sit there and retype it out again. And so let's say I want to go back in my history. Let's say I did a step and I really want to go back to how I had it before. I want to go back to the lowercase. I can go back to my history panel which it looks like I don't see it there. I think that's history right there. It's right here in my little drop down menu, but let's say I want to drag it out and see what it looks like. So here is our little history panel. I can go back steps in time. So let's say this is all the exercises or all the activities that we've done. It keeps track of everything we've done, and we can go back in our history panel to go back to a previous state. So I moved it and I set the character style. I did all these things. Let's go back to where we were. So we can click on each one of these and go back to where we were. There we are. So if you ever want to go back in time, you can always go to your history panel and it remembers all the different things and activities that you did. So I'm going to drag that back into my panel for later. Let's zoom in, and here is how we can make it all uppercase very quickly. We're right down here into the type options, and we're going to go ahead and get the double uppercase all cap icon. We're going to go ahead and click on all caps, and it's going to make it all caps for us. And let's type in all caps. And you can switch this off at any time. We can toggle this on and off, and it just makes it a lot easier to do headlines without having to retype everything in all caps yourself. Just type it in and in all caps. Let's do some different other things happening here. So let's duplicate this and let's make this bold. We're going to type in bold, and I'm going to change the font weight, which is really easy because it's right here in our character panel. And you just go down to bold. And this is also the spacing. It's called tracking. It's the spacing between characters. We talked a lot about this in the theory lessons. This is where you would change it, your tracking, and we just set it to default 0, which is the default spacing between characters. If you want to make it tighter, you can do a negative. So let's do like a -50 to do it tighter, or even tighter, we can do a -100. This is really going to make a really compact type. Or you can make it real wide spacing and do a +200. You can manually type in your number. So let's say I want more than 200. You can type in 800, and you could go beyond 200. You're not stuck with just 200. You can manually type in much bigger numbers to get more dramatic spacing. And once again, all this stuff we're going to be doing over and over again, so don't feel like you have to master everything I'm talking about right now. Just do the basic shapes and get comfortable with layers and the shapes and the move tool. So let's do a -100, or let me do a -75. I can take my move tool, click off, and there's our little bold. Looks like I might have done this at a -25. That might be what I did for this, but just kind of tweaking. You don't have to match this perfectly. We're just practicing. So we've already kind of done this next one. Let's type in wide, and we can just make this wide. Let's do 100. Oh, there it is. 400. I have it labeled there for myself. So let's type it in manually, and now we have that matched. So that's great. You just click once and you're able to type, and you create this great kind of headline typography. But let's say I want to create a paragraph like this, and I want to be able to easily change the shape of that paragraph. So let's say I take our type tool, I click once, and let me take all caps off, just going to my type options, doing lowercase, and getting my tracking back to 0. I am going to type right here, and let's say I want to have a line break. I would have to, nothing's going to stop me. I can keep typing over and over, and there's no box for it to go to the next line. So I have to press return or enter and just do it manually, which is fine. If you're going to do a 1-sentence headline, that's okay. But I want to be able to have a bounding box for my type. So let's do that, something a little bit different. So instead of clicking once and just typing stuff, we're just going to do a slight tweak, and we're going to get our type tool. We're going to click once and continue to click. So we're clicking and holding and dragging. That's all we're doing. And now we've been able to create a bounding box for our paragraph. So let's get everything back to normal. And there's kind of a nice spacing and kerning and all that stuff between all of the sentences. So let's say instead of me typing in gobbledygook, I'd like to go ahead and load some default random text. There's a little trick that you can do. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go up to type, and I'm going to do paste lorem ipsum. So lorem ipsum is Latin. It's just like random Latin words, kind of a random paragraph that you can paste in there. So let's do paste lorem ipsum, and it's going to paste a bunch of dummy text that we can use to play with. So what we did, I've got my move tool. So now look, we created this box. And what's great about this is it automatically does line breaks for me and creates a bounding box. So what I can do is I can select the type tool, have the type tool selected, select our object, and you're going to see these dotted lines. That's going to give you a chance to expand this out, to make it bigger. Let's move our properties panel over. So you can make it longer, you can make it like a short column, and it's absolutely great for being able to work and create all this without having to sit there and manually create line breaks. So we can change the spacing between the lines. Right now it's kind of a default, it looks really nice, but let's say we want to add more spacing or we want to contract it more. So we have our move tool selected. We're going to select our entire box here. I'm going to double click. Anytime you want to edit text in a newer version of Photoshop, you just have to double click any kind of text box and it'll highlight it all. It's kind of nice. So with everything highlighted, I want to go down to my character panel and I want to change, let's say I want to make it bigger, 16 leading. So I have really wide spaces between, or you can make it really tight. And we can also change our type size here, so we can make it a little bit smaller. Let's do like an even 6. So lots of different ways, and we'll do a lot of this a little bit later, especially we don't really work with large blocks of copy like this or large blocks of text in Photoshop as much. I use Photoshop mostly for photo editing and putting together some really short social media posts, so I don't really have tons and tons of text I'm working with in Photoshop, but I wanted to let you know it is possible to manage and create paragraph boxes in Photoshop, and we'll do a lot more of that in Adobe Illustrator, and even more we'll work with really large blocks of copy in Adobe InDesign, which is really designed for lots of big long paragraphs. So anytime you want to edit a size, make sure this is the trick. You can select the move tool and you're like, well, I can move it, I can make it bigger, smaller, but to change the actual text container, you got to select the text type tool, and then it'll give you that dotted line. That's kind of tricky. It took me a little bit of time to realize I had to do that. And there is the trick. Just click the move tool. We can deselect, just click somewhere outside on our artboard, and we can go ahead and move on to the next one. Here's another layer challenge I missed. Let's go ahead and create these 3 circles. And we'll do that in the next video. Here's another quick layer challenge because you can never practice layers enough. Let's do this one real quick. And it's getting the ellipse tool. And let's go put our properties panel over here, and let's get our layers panel out here. You don't have to drag this out every time. I just like to have it close by. So let's create a new layer. Let's call this Circle 1. Hold down Shift and drag to get a nice perfect circle. And we can duplicate this layer. Duplicate layer, I have a copy, and I can drag this over. But sometimes when I just use my mouse and I drag it over, it's not like perfectly lining up. I get these little pink smart guides that are going to help me snap things in position. But if you were to make a duplicate, hold down the Shift key and drag, and it'll kind of put it in this line for you. So you don't have to sit there and try to perfectly guess it. Let's try that one more time. I'm going to make a duplicate, right click, duplicate layer. I'm going to take that duplicate, I'm going to hold down Shift and drag, and it's going to just keep it right in the same line. Let's make these different colors. I can select my object. I have the move tool. I'm just selecting my object, clicking on it. Go over to appearance. I can change this to red. Click over here. I can change this to yellow. So the goal of the exercise is to create 3 circles and move them in the layering system to create this arrangement with the center circle on top of the other 2. So this is how I have it selected. See, the center is on the top. So what I want to do is I want to find this orange one. So this is the orange one. I can label these to make it easier on myself, but it's this one right here. I have it selected. I'm just going to move this on top. So that seems really simple, but what's great about this is I can have these overlap in any way imaginable. And once I label them, it makes it a lot easier. So if I had this as orange and yellow, I can go ahead. And this seems really basic, but when you have 50 layers, it is so good to be able to really understand that layering system. So the next thing we're going to talk about is photos. How do we add photos in Photoshop? We're going to talk about editing photos in future videos, but right now it's just about adding and bringing in photos into Photoshop. I get a lot of student questions about how do you bring photos in, and there's lots of different ways to bring in photos. So one of my favorite ways to bring in photos is using the frame tool. So what the frame tool does is it creates, let's go ahead and find it over here on our toolbar. This is the frame tool. And what it does is it helps to bring in photos in a predetermined shape. So let's say I know I want to have a photo this rectangular size. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to get the frame tool. I'm going to click and drag and go ahead and try to form a rectangle. So you'll see this little cross lines. That means that's a frame, and that you can drag in photos from your computer right into the frame. It'll automatically populate in that shape and crop it right there on that shape. So let's take a photo that I've downloaded online, and I can click and drag this just right over it. Just going to click it right in. It's going to automatically populate and frame it. And I could take the move tool. I can move this around, move my frame around. Let's say I want to zoom in on her but keep the same frame. I can double click on the image. So I'm going to try that again. It's going to select it, double click on the image, and then I can take these transform controls and I can make her a little bit bigger, and it still keeps the frame size, which is really nice. I can press on enter, and there she is cropped in there. We're going to create that again. So we are going to create a frame. Got our frame tool. Let's match this rectangle right here perfectly. Let's go ahead and bring an image in. It could be any image. And here's the challenge. Extend the frame to cover this space and frame the photo properly in the extended space. So as we studied before, we can double click the photo and be able to crop the photo within this frame, but I want to be able to extend that frame outward. So I'm going to kind of zoom in so you can kind of see what I'm selecting here. So I'm going to click the frame. You'll see like a little blue outline. I'm going to click it again. I'm going to be able to bring it out and extend it outwards. Press enter. So you'll notice I extended the frame. See how I extended it out? But the photo is cropped right there. So what I need to do is double click the photo and extend that out. Just like that. So that's one way to bring in photos. There's many different ways. We can also do it with a circle. If I go up to my frame tool right here, you'll notice an extra circle option has loaded up here at the top. So we could click on circle, and then we can create a circle frame and drag it into a circle space. We could double click the photo to move the photo around, maybe crop it, get the move tool, get those transform controls. That's how you get the transform controls, as you go to the move tool, and then I press enter. Or if I want to change the frame, I just select the frame and bring it out. There's other ways to add photos. I'm going to show you really quickly. You can go to File, New. I'm just going to create a new document. Just going to create what we already had. Go down to Create. I can do a file place. So this is another way to bring in photos. You go to File. You're going to go down to Place Embedded. And we're going to be able to place an embedded photo. And it'll just bring it in. Press enter. And we have a separate photo layer that you can make a little bit bigger, and it works really well. That's one way to do it. There's another way I like to do it. You can drag a photo right in there without a container. So let's say we're in here and I can just drag it right in. You don't have to have a frame. You do not have to have a frame, but what it's going to do is it's going to bring it in at like a full resolution. So you just have to take it and then scale it how you like to. So a couple different ways to bring in photos. You could just drag them right in. You can drag them into a frame, whatever you'd like to do. So next thing we're going to do is the brush tool. We're going to do brush tool work later on when we talk about layering masks, and that's a couple other more intermediate kind of tools. So let's go ahead and get started with the brush tool. So here we are, the brush tool. So the brush tool is found on your toolbar. Right down here, it's this little icon. Right here, we're just going to select the regular brush tool. And we are going to use this is going to be very, very simple, the soft round brush. So when you go up here to the top left, you'll see an ability to make your brush size bigger. So we're going to go down to our general brushes, and we want to load the soft round brush. This kind of has a feathering effect to it, and I use this probably way more than any other default brush. So let's select the soft round brush, and let's go ahead and make it 100 point size. I have it labeled here so you can know what to make it. So 100 point, this is where you change the size of your brush. I'm going to go ahead and press enter. And now I'm going to take my brush tool, and you'll notice I have this kind of symbol. It's not letting me create anything. It says could not use the brush tool because no layers are selected. I got to create my layer. So I'm just going to go down here. I always got to make sure to create my layer, and this will be the soft round brush. So now I have a layer to draw on. So let's change it. We can change it to like a gray or a, let's do blue so we can kind of paint over it and see how we do here. So we have a blue color. We're going to click and drag. So you'll notice I'm trying to do my best to match it, but it's not perfect. So we could try our little hold down shift trick. So I'm going to hold down my shift key, then click and drag, and I can make it a perfect, no matter what I move here, I can make it a perfect line. So I'm going to hold down shift and drag, and I could go back over it a second time. You'll notice how it makes it a little bit thicker. It's almost like painting it on over and over and over. See that? So let's do a hard round brush. So I'm going to go up here to the top. I'm going to select hard round right below it, and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to hold down shift, click, and drag. And so look at that. Nice, perfect size. If I were to not hold down shift, I'm not really that good with my mouse. So, so definitely holding down shift really helps it make nice and smooth. So let's reduce the brush size. Let's reduce it to 30 points. You can type it in manually or you can slide it. Sometimes I just like to double click and type it in manually. Now I can do my best to match it up. I can zoom in, click, shift, hold, and there's the hard round brush. Very, very basic brush kind of tools. There's all sorts of things we're going to do with it later when we do layering masks and we paint on layering masks. We'll do that later. So here's another little challenge with opacity. We've already kind of talked about opacity a little bit, but we're going to do it right here. We're going to go to our layers panel. We're going to make sure we're on 100% opacity, 100% strength, and we are going to, I believe that's 100 points. And it doesn't have to match perfectly. We're just practicing opacity. Let's go ahead and click, shift, and go down. Let's make that a different color. So I'm going to go down here to my color, my fill right down here. Let's make it orange so we can see what we're doing. Click, hold down shift, and drag. That's 100%. So let's do a 75% opacity. And I have my brush tool selected. So instead of just creating another line, you notice all this is connected. So if I make this 75%, it's going to change both of them. I want to have individual control over everything I do. So here's what I'm going to do instead. I'm going to create a new layer. And now this is going to be an independent layer that I can change. And there we go. It's all independent. Make a new layer. And definitely name yours. Sometimes I have so many layers, it's too long to rename stuff, but I highly encourage you to name your layers if you want to take the time. Some people are lazy, like myself. That's okay. Create a new layer, click, hold, and that'll be 25. That kind of helps you remember to create a new layer with each new thing you do, especially when you're changing different opacities. You don't want them to all be connected. Sometimes you want them all to be connected. You can just keep it all on the same layer. So we did the worksheet. There's only one little thing we have left as an extra challenge, and we're going to do that next. This is the very, very, very basics of Adobe Photoshop. This is great if you're brand new to Adobe Photoshop. Hopefully you got used to the layering system and just creating basic shapes and using the type tool. We're going to take what we've learned in the last 20 to 30 minutes and we're going to do the challenge right here. It's a challenge. We're going to create a simple social media post and we're going to put a headline on top of a photo And I'm even going to make it a little bit more complicated and throw in a couple shapes too. It's going to really help us practice that layering system. And then after that, we're going to start to tackle some pretty cool projects in Photoshop. So we're going to be able to go over these same tools over and over again with repetition so that you don't feel afraid that you have to master this before moving on. Just keep moving through those lessons and you're going to get really familiar with this just through repetition and practice and time. We are going to tackle the challenge. So we're going to take what we've learned and we're going to create a very simple Instagram post. The only requirement is to have a photo and have text on top of the photo. So let's create a new document, File, New. It's going to remember what we created last time, which was already an Instagram post size, 1080 by 1080 pixels. You could do whatever size you want. You don't have to copy me perfectly. Go ahead and just keep everything default and just click on Create. So here's our document. There's a lot of ways we can bring in our photo. And so I went to pexels.com, which I find a lot of my photos on, and I just typed in shoe. I wanted to do a quick little shoe post that said 20% off or some kind of advertising for a shoe. This is something we can quickly practice our layer system with. So I went ahead and downloaded this photo. It's by Melvin Buzo. Photographers will sometimes remove photos from Pexels. This is a free website. I love to find Pexels.com. I love to find photos. You're going to get really sick of me talking about it because I talk about it all the time. A lot of the photos I use for projects are found on Pexels. If a photographer removes a photo, try to find a different type of photo. It happens all the time. I use a photo for a project and then the photographer removes it and then students don't have access to it. That's okay. You can use an alternative one. Just type in shoe. If for some reason that one's no longer available, right now it should be, you can type in and do this exercise over and over again with different photos. So I downloaded that photo. I can drag it in. So I have my downloads. I can just drag it right in and it's going to automatically populate it. You could have created a frame if you wanted it to frame perfectly in the square. You could create a frame that goes over the whole document, and that is a circle. We want to create a square, so I just went up there and selected square, and I can do the same thing and drag it in. So I can double click and I can move and frame this how I want. So I get the move tool, so I can get my transform box. That move tool is handy for that. But I mean, it really depends if you like working with frames or not. They have their benefits and they have their negatives. For this case, I think I'm just going to drag it in and not use a frame. I'm going to drag it in and not use a frame because it's a pretty easy. I like to use frames when I'm working with multiple photos, but when I have like one big background photo, sometimes just dragging it in works really well too. So we have our background layer. Let's just say shoe photo. On our layer, we have this background layer, which is by default. You can unlock this. So you see how it has this little lock icon. You can lock layers so that you don't accidentally move it. The background layer is almost always locked, but you can unlock it by just selecting the lock icon, and now it's its own little white layer. But I'm going to keep it locked. I just wanted to kind of show you locking. You can also lock the shoe photo. So let's say I have this cropped perfectly. I don't want to change it how I have it. I don't want to accidentally select it and move it. You can go up to this lock icon. I'm going to go ahead and zoom in. You can see the little lock icon, lock it. So if you ever have a hard time selecting a layer, make sure it's not locked. And now I can click and I can't drag it around. It kind of locks it in place. So let's create a text layer. So for text layers, what's great about it, or type layers, I can click on the type tool and click. What's great about it is it creates a layer for you. It's not like an object where you have to create a new layer and then load the object. It automatically turns it into its own layer. So we could say 20% off. And we get our move tool. We get our transform control so we can make it bigger. And press enter when we're happy with it. We can go over to our properties panel and we can change the color. And if you want to try to get the eyedropper tool and sample this yellow because I like to bring out colors in photos and tie them all together to create a theme. So I'm going to double click this color swatch on my properties panel, and if I have this color picker that pops up, I can go outside of this color picker and then automatically it's going to give me an eyedropper tool to sample a color. So I'm going to go down here and sample a yellow color. That might be a little dark, so I have to kind of test out and make sure it's going to be visible enough. We can also sample this red because there's a lot of red also in here because that's just not going to be high contrast enough. I'm not going to be able to see that very well. So maybe just trying some different colors to sample out, see what could work. Maybe the red. So we can change the typeface to anything we want. Right now I just have it on Open Sans. I guess we can keep it with Open Sans. We can make it extra bold, make it nice and big and bold. And we need to have some details. So let's go ahead and create a duplicate of this text. I'm going to just go right click, duplicate layer. And I have the move tool selected. I'm just going to drag it down. And we type in shoes. So now we have kind of these kind of two text boxes that are independent of each other that we can use. So let's have some contrast between these two. So let's take shoes, let's make it regular, and let's bring out one of these other colors. Let's bring out black. Click OK, take our move tool, and click off. So now we have these independent layers. So now we can click and drag. Here's another great way to select multiple layers. So I can click and drag, and as long as there's no other background layers in the way, I can click and drag and I can select both of these too and just drag them down. You can just find an opportunity to place that here. So that is okay, but it really doesn't pop. We need to get maybe like a shape or something to really get something to pop off that white. So I have the ellipse tool selected, and I'm just going to create an ellipse tool. Let's make sure we have a new layer. Click and hold, and we have our ellipse tool. Let's drag this where the type is on top of the circle. So we're going to drag this ellipse tool below the type. So I just click and hold and drag it right below. So now I can kind of change the colors on here to make sure they pop. So I'm just going to color. I'm just making them white. So we can make this ellipse tool a little bit smaller. Put it right here in this open area. And maybe we can center align those two objects. And it could be that black shows up better. And it could be, you just have to find the right combination. Make sure it's high contrast enough to be readable. So if I make this yellow, that's just not popping. But if I were to change the typography to maybe this black that's in the picture, it's going to have just enough contrast to be shown a little bit better. So that's nothing too amazing or too brilliant, just kind of practicing layer systems. So we have our type on the very top, we have our photo locked and on the bottom, and we have this ellipse tool that we can freely move around, and we can freely move each one of these text boxes around as well to make a headline. Let's go a little bit more detailed and do another little small image. We're going to take the basic skills we've just learned to recreate this social media post. It's just a simple image. There are two text boxes here and a colored background. So this is what we're going to be creating right now. So I'm going to open up a new document. Just go to File, New, and just do the same old 1080 by 1080 pixels we've been doing in prior projects. So here we have our canvas. And since we have, if I go back here to the completed version, we have this photo in a frame in a particular size. And we have this nice, generous margin around it, which really gives it some nice breathing room. It's just a specific kind of design layout and style that looks really nice and clean. So because this has a particular size, and I would like to use frames instead of just dragging my photo in at a high resolution and sizing it up, I'm going to bring in the photo using frames this time. So let's do that. Let's get our frame tool, and let's do about kind of the same size you saw before. I want to have kind of equal, generous margins around. And I want to leave a little extra space to kind of show a little bit of that background color throughout. Of course, I can take the Move tool and position this any way I like. When I'm happy, I can drag my photo right in. Just drag it, and you do not have to use this photo. This is the photo I use from pexels.com by Marcelo Chagas. And you can find that photo. You can use another photo. Doesn't really matter. You don't have to use the same one. I actually like it when you use different photos than what I have. But if you want to follow along, now that I have it in the frame, I'm going to click twice, and I'm able to kind of crop it a little bit better. I have the Move tool selected, so I have my transform controls that I can kind of get the right cropping for her. And I'd like to show off a little bit of that dress too, because I think I want to bring in a little bit of the green in the dress. So just trying to find the right position. I'm going to press enter when I'm happy and click off. So I want to create a colored background. So by default, I have this locked background layer, and I can unlock it and just use that, or I can create a new layer and use the rectangle tool and just create kind of a background color. So whatever you want to use, you can have a background, you can toggle it off, delete it, or even just use that background and change the color of the background. Or you could do what I did and just bring in a rectangle tool to be your background layer. It doesn't really matter, however you want to do it. So now that I've created and used a rectangle tool, I have the ability to easily change the color. I'm going to go over here to the special area where I can get my hue cube out, and I can select any color. So any of these colors are going to work okay, but what I like to do is find inspiration from the photos themselves. So I'm just going to go out here, get that eyedropper tool. It's going to automatically kind of load for you, and we can select different colors and then click OK to see what we think works well. So what I'd like to do is we could bring out the green like that, and so we're kind of playing off the green in her shirt. We can also play off of let me go ahead and get my color back here, off kind of some of her skin tones as well. So kind of some medium, not highlight, not shadow, but just something kind of in the middle. And it just feels like the photo and the background are kind of more together as one unit, because you have a lot of the skin color and you're kind of bringing that out in the background. You could do the green as well, whatever makes you feel better. And let's bring in some typography. So let's just do this really generic, simple, short headline. So let's go ahead and make sure we don't have anything selected. Let's get our type tool. Let's click just down here. Just click once. We're not going to be making a paragraph box, just a simple headline. So let's do live life to the, and let's put fullest on its own layer so we can make that a little bit bigger and have some contrast between our lines of type. So live life to the, and let's just make a duplicate of this. Hold down Option or Alt and drag. Live life to the fullest. Let's type in fullest. And let's make this one a little bit bigger. And just kind of arrange this. What I like to do sometimes when I have this kind of specific design style where I have these nice generous margins and nice clean lines, what I also like to do is push the boundary of the typography a little bit, maybe push it outside the box. So you're kind of creating this nice, interesting tension in the design. So now what I want to do is let's do some all caps here. Let's definitely do it to this larger one. I want to try to differentiate these two different lines of type so they just read really well together, and there's contrast and there's interesting things happening between the two lines of type. So let's go to our properties panel, and sometimes you have to scroll down to find the all caps option. So all caps for that, and let's also do all caps for this one as well. We could find other ways to add contrast here by maybe changing the weight of the live life to the fullest or live life to the. That's not as important or interesting as fullest. Like that's our big word of the headline. So let's maybe lighten the font weight here. So let's double click this, highlight it, and let's go to properties. We have to go right back up here, and let's do maybe a semi-bold perhaps. Get my move tool, just kind of click off, and there we go. So we can arrange these, and I kind of like, we could do this perfect left alignment, but it's always a little interesting to kind of have go down and to the right. Just kind of reads really nicely. And something that can make it a little elegant is adding some spacing between the characters or changing our tracking. So right now this is default at, let's see what this is. This is 0 right over here in our properties panel. Let's maybe make that 200 and make this a little bit smaller. This adds a little spacing and interesting looks to that. So I'm going to press enter here, and let's say I want to nudge it right over to the edge here. I can take my arrow keys on my keyboard to just do some slight nudging of any layer. So if I want to kind of bring that E over and I don't feel like having to move it over with my mouse, I can just do my little right arrow key and it just nudges it just a little bit. That's great for making little minor adjustments. It's using those arrow keys on your keyboard, just a little trick. And kind of the popular thing to do is kind of bringing these really big words and headlines to the very edge of the document. It's just a style thing that's popular these days. You do not have to do that. I've just noticed a lot with social media posts. I did a design trends for 2021 on social media posts, which you can watch that lesson if you're a part of this course at the end of the class. And we do some really cool trend work with social media posts, like using outlined typography instead of the solid fill typography that's been kind of really popular. And so we put together really cool projects toward the end of the course. So we have our typography at the very top of the layering system. If we had these at the bottom below the background, you would not see them, but we can drag these on the very top so that they are on the top. We have a couple layers. We have the type layers. We have a photo here within a frame. If you ever want to remove a photo from a frame, so this isn't a frame, we don't want the frame, we just want the full photo unframed. Click on this little thumbnail, right click it, remove frame from layer. So it's going to remove the frame, it's going to make it a full photo again. Or you can go back into your history panel, go back one step to get it back to how you had it. So to kind of use that history panel if you want to check out how something looks. And if you don't like it, you can go back in your history one step and you don't have to sit there and reframe it all over again if you didn't like how it looked. So now I can unlock that and make it any other color that I'd like to make it. If I want to tweak the color, maybe do the green. Super, super simple arrangement of layers. We used frames, but you don't have to use frames to bring in photos all the time. They just really help with getting them into a predetermined size. So there we go. I really hope these lessons that I redid, I reworked, I refilmed, I wanted to slow everything down a little bit because I feel like with my prior lessons, I went a little fast and I heard your feedback and I wanted to redo these lessons to make sure we just slowed down and really understood the basic interface so that you can feel confident moving on to some more intermediate tasks. We're going to be doing some photo editing, or we're going to be working with some really popular tools like the Liquify tool and going to be removing objects, cutting out people so we can really work with that layering system and put people and text and really wrap them all together and to create some really cool stuff. So I can't wait to see you in the next section. Before we move on to the photo editing section, I wanted to address a lot of student concerns and questions about certain editing options being grayed out in the menu system. So there are a couple of ways to bring in photos as we just talked about, and I want to talk about smart objects. So smart objects are special layers that retain the original photo's characteristics. And what's great about this is it can scale higher resolutions up and down without blurring, as it remembers the original resolutions and pixels. So there's several ways you might open up photos as we discussed. If we were to take a photo and bring it right into Photoshop and open it, you'll get a photo here. And you'll notice that the background layer is locked. That's easy. We can double click it and click on OK and unlock that layer. Now we have the ability to edit that photo. We can go up to Image, Adjustments, and we can do all of our different adjustments layer, which is what we're going to talk about in the next lesson. But a lot of students have had the concern that a couple of these are grayed out, and they're not able to really apply a lot of the effects and edit the photo or cut any kind of objects out. That's because they have smart objects on. And so I dragged the photo in and it opened up as a regular layer. If I were to open up a new document like we were doing in the previous lessons, and I can drag a photo in. If I drag a photo into a document that's already open, and I press enter, you'll notice it is called a smart object. See this little icon down here? That means we're going to go over this a couple more times in the course. It's a smart object, and so it retains everything about the photo. So I can make it really small, press enter, and I can make the photo really big again, and it retains that high resolution. It never really loses it. It doesn't pixelate. If I were to take the image that I just opened up directly as a new image, I just went like this and dragged it in. I didn't put it into an already existing document. Brought this into Photoshop. You'll notice it doesn't bring it in as a smart object. If I were to scale this really, really tiny, press enter, and I were to blow it back up again, you'll notice it didn't remember the pixels. It doesn't retain any of the original image's dimensions or characteristics. So it gets really blurry. So you can see why having smart objects on when you're not sure the final size of your photo is really nice. So if I go over here and I have this as a smart object thumbnail, you can always tell because of that little icon. I go to image, and let's say I want to start to do some photo editing, which we're going to be talking about this. You'll notice a lot of these are grayed out. That's because some of these adjustments cannot be applied to smart object layers. So to fix this problem, and you're happy with the final size of this photo, you can always right-click any smart object layer, and you can rasterize the layer. And when you rasterize the layer, you remove the smart object abilities. But this means you can have a few more options that are not grayed out. So now you notice all of a sudden when I right-clicked and rasterized the layer and no longer made it a smart object, I can do more things to it. But smart objects have their place, especially when you want to scale up and down images. I felt like I just wanted to include this extra lesson to kind of go through that so you didn't get confused when I start doing photo editing and maybe you dragged your photo right into an already existing document and it made it a smart object. So let's say you want to make an image a smart object. So let's go ahead and practice. Let's right click, let's rasterize the layer. This is just a regular layer. Let's say I want to make it a smart object and for some reason the photo doesn't have that little icon, it's not a smart object. I want to right click and I want to be able to convert to smart object. So now it's a smart object. I'm free to make it small and I'm free to make it big, and it retains all that original pixel data and resolution data. So that's what smart objects are for. There's other things you can't do with smart objects, so anything that directly edits a pixel. So there are dodge and burn tools here. There's a couple other tools. There's painting, there's cloning. If you ever wanted to clone a smart object, if I went over to my clone tool, and don't worry, we're going to be going over this, you'll notice I have this little no sign, this little cannot do it, cannot perform operation sign. So I click, it says could not use the clone stamp because the area to clone has not been defined. So that is because it's a smart object and you can't like edit the little individual pixels directly with smart objects. And that's no problem because I can right click, rasterize. Now I have the ability to use the clone tool and I can take my sample and start to clone. And so if you ever run into any problems, it might be because you have smart layers on, and you can always right click and rasterize that layer, or you can convert it to a smart object if you want to be making resizing lots of photos and you don't want to get it to be pixelated. So right click, rasterize, and you can do a few of these things like the clone tool and a couple of the adjustment tools. But I prefer leaving an image in smart objects as long as you can because it's nice to be able to scale it without that pixelation. So hopefully that's not confusing. If it's confusing, don't worry. I can just ask me the question and hopefully I can clear up anything for you. We're going to be going over that again and again, like a lot of things here. So don't panic, don't stress out. This is a lot to take in. So I'll see you in the next lesson. We're going to start to do some photo editing.